A doctor, but not that kind workshop presentation on
Thanks,
by
Seven.
this is put on by Star Scholars, which I, Annika, am a mentor for, as well as Brianna, who will be the other Star Scholars mentor leading this event. So first, we wanted to just kind of introduce you a little bit to the topic today, which is what you can do after getting a PhD. So I'll go over a quick couple of slides related to that. You're welcome to put any questions in the chat. We'll be checking that, and then we will get on to our panelists. So one thing you can do after getting a PhD, and specifically a psychology PhD, and perhaps most straightforward, is go on to become a professor. This is a job that offers flexibility to research the things you're interested in, the opportunity to work with graduate and undergraduate students, opportunities to communicate with and collaborate with other scientists, serve the community and causes you care about, and make your own schedule. However, being a professor is not for everyone. And in Star Scholars, we really emphasize something called transferable skills, which are skills you can get in one area such as academic research, and which you can apply to lots of different opportunities. So research, and specifically getting a psychology PhD, prepares you with relational and interpersonal skills to work with other people and maybe even animals. Problem solving and critical thinking skills, communication and outreach skills, data analytics skills, and many others. And so these can be applied to lots of different jobs outside of the academy. So just to name a few, these would be things like academic advising and administration, user experience or market research, could be a journal editor at an academic journal, or research in non-academic institutions such as think tanks or policy institutes, nonprofit associations or grant funding institutions. And specifically for people with clinical PhDs, you're also set up to see patients as a therapist. And as we can see from this, people with psychology PhDs do go on to do lots of different types of jobs. Only about a fourth actually staying in university settings. So you see a lot of people work in hospitals, governments, or other sort of businesses or nonprofits. So there is really a wide range of opportunities after you get your psychology PhD. And just a plug, so if you are someone who's having trouble figuring out what's the right path for you after a psychology PhD or beginning to think about this, the number one way would be talking to people with careers you find interesting and learning about their sort of degree and education and career path. So events like today, where we will get to hear from 4 really amazing researchers in non-academic jobs. Also, My IDP is a really great online resource that has assessments to figure out your skills and interests and look at different careers that PhDs and postdocs tend to go into after, and sort of assess how compatible those different careers might be for your interests and skills. And then there are also University of Michigan specific resources like the University Career Alumni Network, where you can find alumni from the university and see what careers they've gone on to, as well as access a bunch of other resources through that. So with that, I will pass it on to Brianna.
Thanks, Annika. So to start, I'm wondering if, well, first, Annika, could you stop your screen share and maybe I will be able to pin our 4 panelists so everyone can see them. And we can just start with some introductions. So what program did you graduate from at Michigan? What is your job title? And anything else that you want to briefly share about yourself in an introduction. So maybe Abby, would you like to start first?
Hi, everyone. I graduated from the combined program in education and psychology, and my job title is consultant. I put on the slide pay equity compensation consultant because I feel like it describes it better, but my official job title is consultant.
Thanks.
Was there anything
Christy?
else I should add to that, or?
No, that's fine. That's a good start. Thank you. Christy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy. I graduated from the personality and social context area. Stacy and I were in the same cohort. It's really fun to see you guys here. And Abby was the same year as us. I also know Adrian. I know everyone. But yeah, so I graduated 2 years ago, did a postdoc, and now I'm a researcher for the Detroit Pistons.
Cool. Maybe Adrian?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Adrienne Woods. I also graduated from the combined program in education and psychology, and we all overlapped, I think. And I now work as a senior education researcher at SRI International in the education division, and SRI is a pretty nice bridge between academia and industry. So we're a research nonprofit.
Great. And Stacy.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me here. So I'm Stacy, and I graduated from the Joint Psychology and Women's and Gender Studies program. So I was with Christy in the personality and social context area, which also overlaps with the gender and feminist psych area as well. And I graduated in December 2021, I believe. Or was it 2020? I don't know. Time flies. I am currently a UX researcher, and UX stands for user experience, which I'll tell you all about in a little bit. And I'm currently at a company called Accenture, which is essentially a consultancy firm that places you at other companies where you work embedded on a team. So I'm currently specifically like in the technology sector, working at a very large internet company that I cannot disclose.
Okay, thank you. So to start us off, I'm wondering if, and feel free to go in any order that makes sense when answering these questions. I'm wondering if you all could describe what a typical day in the life looks like at your job. So maybe just expanding a bit more on, like what your role is and what a typical day in the life is like.
You want us to go in a specific order? Like, does someone want to go first? Abby, you can go first, and then I'll follow you again if you want.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I'm a pay equity compensation consultant. Like, what is that, right? So, I had never heard of compensation consulting until I applied for this job. Essentially, there are consultant firms like my firm that are hired by other companies to tell them how to pay people at their companies. And so Perlmeyer specializes in executive compensation. So they help other companies decide how they're going to pay their executives. But there is a small handful of people at my company who do broad-based compensation, which is basically everyone below executives. And so compensation consulting is basically looking at what is the marketplace paying for this job. So if Facebook wants to hire a new software developer, they go to a company like ours to say, give us market data on what software developers in our peer group and other companies are being paid. And they do that kind of analysis. So where I come in is I do the pay equity side of things. So I do a little bit of compensation consulting, but primarily my role is to help companies pay people fairly. So pay equity is equal pay for comparable work. And basically, you're allowed legally to pay people differently if they have different jobs, different responsibilities, different levels of experience, different geographies. but you can't pay people differently legally based on gender, race, and other protected factors. And so the day-to-day of my job is really looking at the data from the companies that we're working with and running regression models to see what is predicting people's pay at that company. And we're hoping that gender and race don't come up in the model, and things like, you know, your job and other things are coming up in the model. So I'm doing regression analysis, I'm doing other kinds of analysis to figure out what is the cause of different pay gaps. Day to day, it really depends because I don't always have a client. And so because we're primarily an exec comp company, I have like the least amount of work, honestly, at the company. I work by myself. I'm the only person who's doing this besides the CEO. And there are times like right now where I do not have a client, so I don't have any work to do. So I have to find myself work to do, which is things like going to webinars or, you know, whatever it is. So that's my day to day.
I can jump in next. So I feel like I'm the newest in terms of like work. So I've just been at the Pistons for just over 2 months now. So I'm sure my day-to-day will change, but in general, like think about it today, I actually do a lot of survey work. So I'm creating surveys to help the Pistons gather data, whether that's about their fans. So Stacey mentioned like a UX researcher. I'm basically a UX researcher for sports. So how do fans feel about Pistons merchandise, the game, anything like that. So I could look at fans. I also do research on partnerships and sponsorships. So Delta wanted to partner with the Pistons and maybe be like a jersey patch, visit Abu Dhabi, a bunch of international ones as well as local ones, like Green Shield Deck. We just basically, they want to know, would these partners be a good fit? And so I would do the research using things like YouGov and a lot of stuff that we're really familiar with as PhDs to gather insights on, you know, what percentage of Pistons fans fly often. Would Delta be a good partner for the Pistons? For the deck company, it was like, what percentage of Pistons fans would do construction or get a deck in the next year? So it's stuff like that. Just basically using the research skills we have, building surveys or getting data and creating like a concise report so they can make better business decisions.
Christy, that's so cool. So I and also Abby and I have done multiple of these before. So Abby, you've heard my whole spiel before, so sorry for the repetition. So at SRI, my day-to-day is really flexible, kind of depending on what I have going on that week. As far as just work hours go, I work exactly 40 hours every week. Sometimes you work a little bit more if there's like a proposal or a grant that's due, but one of the really nice things about my company is that our 40 hours is pretty protected. We do not get paid overtime, and our leadership really respects that. So I have a very clear sort of end work time once I've reached my 40 hours. I do have to track them because we have lots of different projects with clients. So I'm very, very conscious about when I'm working and what projects I'm working on. But it varies day to day. I generally try to keep, you know, a 9 to 5 kind of schedule just because those are the typical business hours that people work. But our education division is really split between the two coasts. So most of my meetings happen in the afternoons. So we can kind of accommodate the folks out west. And then, you know, we kind of just know amongst each other who's working when. So the people in California aren't necessarily expecting me to respond to time sensitive emails at 7:30 p.m. for me, and vice versa. I'm not scheduling meetings for them at 7 in the morning. But typically the kind of work that I do is in many ways similar to what you would do as a professor. I do a lot of my own research, write a lot of grants. It's very collaborative. So I work on a lot of different projects. Our clients can be anywhere from, you know, we work directly with the government. I do special education research and research with kids with disabilities and their families, and with teachers and special ed teachers. And so, you know, we could work with clients that are school districts or state departments of education, or, you know, large counties of education, county offices of education, or we can work with the government and work with like the Office for Special Education Programs or the Institute for Ed Sciences. And so we do both research and what's called technical assistance, which is more like consulting. Oftentimes that's us consulting on research-based projects and problems and trying to help, maybe a grantee that has been given money by OSEP, Office of Special Ed Programs, to do some sort of study. They have us contract and come in and kind of look over their materials and their research plan and give them feedback on where they are and what we think they should look forward to in the future, things to be aware of. So yeah, it's a very kind of diverse work schedule, which I think is what I was really looking for. I got kind of tired doing my postdoc, just kind of doing research studies and writing papers. And I have a lot of variety in what I'm working on and what the outputs of those are. Sometimes they're research papers, sometimes I'm publishing just like a professor would. And sometimes I'm writing a memo or I'm having a meeting and giving a presentation. And it's just entirely dependent on what the project is and who the client is. So yeah.
Really awesome to hear what you guys are doing. So as a UX researcher, my goal is essentially to understand the people who are like using your company's products. So for me, I have worked like I said, I'm working in tech, and the company has a specialization in like advertisements. So the people who see advertisements on our platform are like the people who are our users. But for other companies, it could be like the people who use your phone or whatever software your company has, or like in Christy's case, the fans of the team. And so for me, I'm researching people's like attitudes, behaviors, their needs in order to like help influence product and business decisions, essentially with the goal of trying to make sure that the business is building the right thing in the right way. That does not always happen, which is probably like the biggest tension that I experience in my work, and can dive into that a little bit later. But I am primarily using my various research skills, which sounds like what all four of us are doing. And so my day-to-day does definitely vary, but it's all kind of like focused around doing different types of research. So sometimes I am working on more like strategic or foundational research projects where I'm trying to understand like who are our users and like what are their needs, and essentially trying to figure out like what should we be building in the first place, like how should we be building it. The other thing is more like design or iterative research. So once somebody has come up with various solutions that the team is considering, you then want to get feedback on those ideas or prototypes that have been put together to make sure that like they're usable and that they're useful. So I think it's hard to say like exactly what day-to-day involves, but generally a research project will begin with like a consultation or like a kickoff meeting where I will talk to people from other areas of the company. So that could be with designers, engineers, project managers, other researchers, to understand like what the needs are, like what struggles are they having, what is kind of keeping them from moving forward, what goals they have, why they want help in the first place. And a lot of that is managing expectations as well, making sure that they're doing like the right type of project. You never want to just like take what they think you should be doing and do that, because you're not there to like validate their thoughts, ideally. And then from there, I will move on to like, writing up like the study protocol, a research plan. I might be reviewing internal research that's been done, occasionally some external research, but typically just like what's been done within the company internally. You'll put together some potential options for a study, and then you'll get feedback on that. And then from there, the research essentially happens. You might be talking directly to users, where you are doing interviews, or you might be doing survey research. There's also different types of UX researchers. So like some people can focus more on like qualitative research, which is mostly what I do. And then there's also quantitative folks who are, the main difference is just like the methods you're using. They're focused more on like statistical modeling, programming, working with very large data sets. And then, research projects wrap up in terms of like me doing analysis. So like right now I'm cleaning up some survey research. I have this like very large data set that I got and need to make sure that I'm able to then analyze it. And then from there, you will put together a report, which could take the form of like a short presentation or sometimes just like a doc report. They're never as in-depth as like a research publication would be. And then you will typically have like a 30-minute to an hour-long meeting with like your various stakeholders and give them like the findings, the recommendations, and things like that. Typically you're working on like a couple research projects at a time. But I'll get into all of that later.
The next question is, what was your education path? Kind of a two-pronged question. What was your education path? Ideally, maybe starting like at the time you were an undergraduate. And how did you end up in the career that you are in after you earned your PhD?
Are we just going to keep going in the same order then? Or? So I went into my Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, because I wanted to be a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. And so I didn't really know what clinical psychology entailed at the time, but that's what I wanted to do. And all my courses were really oriented toward clinical and counseling. And after I graduated, I didn't have the grades to apply to graduate school, so I thought I would get some work experience for a little while first. I was out of school for 2 years, and in that time, I volunteered at the Distress Centers, which is a suicide prevention helpline in Toronto, which is where I'm from. And in doing that for 2 years, I realized like this really isn't for me. And I wanted to be at a point where I could address people's needs before they got to a point where they were calling the helpline. And so that's what brought me to do research. And so I applied to the Applied Social Psychology program at the University of Windsor, which is right across from Detroit. And it was a combined master's and PhD program, a 6-year program that was very much oriented toward, my stream was community psychology. So it was oriented toward helping me to go back into the community and do research for a community. And in doing that during my master's, I realized I don't want to do this either. I want to be a professor. And so I applied to the University of Michigan and started there in 2016. And so at this point, I'm starting my PhD. I'm 27 years old. So, I had a lot of like experience prior to the PhD coming in. And I did 2 postdocs after I graduated. I graduated a semester early, but with the pandemic and everything else going on, my priorities in life just changed. And I realized like I'm in my 30s and I have no savings to speak of because I've been a student my whole life, and no family either. So like what was all of this for? And so it was that made me realize like I wanted to transition to something more lucrative that would allow me to really prioritize and focus on creating a family. And I will say that, so the question was about just the education path and what got us to our current jobs. Yeah, so basically, during my second postdoc, I had an experience doing a course called Financial Peace University, a Dave Ramsey course, where I learned the difference in like time and compound interest when you're investing versus when you start earlier versus later. And I was in my 30s and I was like, if I started when I first graduated, maybe things would look different. And so I realized like I wanted to start sort of, my life sooner. And so I started applying to industry jobs like right away. And I was really interested in tech jobs, to be honest, and had been pursuing tech jobs, but I applied to the job that I have now, and I really enjoyed the company, the people that I had met in my interviews, and the work sounded interesting. It seemed like I had a lot of opportunities to grow. And I just love the idea of being able to translate my skill set to help people get paid better, because all of our recommendations, like I get to after I do all my analysis, I get to present my recommendations to, the CEO of the company or senior leadership or the board. And my recommendations are always to pay people more. And so it's really cool to be able to have that kind of impact that's like direct, and I don't have to wait. I really don't like publishing. And like, I took like 5 years to publish one paper and just like destroyed my self-esteem. And so being able to like have like tangible things that I could do daily really helped. And that's what brought me to my current job.
I feel like I like relived everything. Like I feel that was a very similar experience for me too. I'm nodded along. So I'm gonna just like zip through because yeah, I did an undergrad in psych, thought I wanted to be a doctor, the other doctor, ended up going through grad school. I actually wanted to be in the WNBA when I was younger. I was a basketball player, believe it or not. Then I thought I wanted to be like an NBA wife instead. Then I got the PhD. At the time when I thought about sports as a career, like they didn't have researcher jobs. And in fact, like the job that I have now is like the only researcher position in the NBA. Just so happened that it landed in Detroit, and which is where I am. The only one other position across another league is at the Houston Texans, which I actually had an offer for, and that's an NFL team. So research for sports is really new, which is so surprising because they're like a multi-billion-dollar, it's kind of crazy they're not paying researchers to do some work. They're very behind. Anyway, so they didn't have this kind of job when I had first finished undergrad, not even maybe when I finished my master's. And then I started thinking I would be to be in stats, maybe as an analyst to be in sports. They do have some of those now, but still very few. So I'm thinking of breaking into sports as a researcher. I want to be the director of research in the whole NBA. I want to carve paths for everybody else. But to go back, why I decided to pivot was, I don't know if you guys will go through this. I hope not. I was on the academic job market for 2 years. I had some interviews. I had some offers. Nothing felt good. I felt like it was kind of crazy that we worked so hard and studied for so long to just have to go wherever we maybe get one offer and uproot our whole life while we are in our late 20s, maybe early 30s. And I kind of thought that was crazy. And also during that time, you're starting to like maybe settle down with someone. So how could you uproot their life? And I ended up getting a postdoc, did a postdoc. And when I was signing my postdoc offer letter, I just felt so unjust. I was like, I cannot believe I just did 6 years of this PhD, 2 masters. Well, okay, 4-year PhD, 2 masters, whatever it was. And I'm only getting paid this amount. And I got so upset. And I was just like, I'm done. Just spent like, I don't know, 20% of the time of my postdoc applying to jobs. Still had a great time with the postdoc. I think they're wonderful, but I just felt like I cannot be, in my 30s now, like Abby said, like had to put nothing towards retirement. We didn't get paid enough to do that. Like I was just feeling like, okay, like I want to start. And I also feel like we deserve more. So that was my pivot. I actually applied broadly. So like Adrian talked about SRI, like I applied to companies like that too. Turns out the only offers I actually got were for sports teams. So it like came full circle. I applied to a lot of like health research jobs and stuff, but yeah, those generally I think mostly go towards like the public health PhDs. You have to have like if your research program, like, very much lens. So I have like friends who did child development, child health, brain behavior stuff, and they got really good jobs in health. But yeah, that was my path and my thinking throughout school and how I got here.
I love doing these panels. It feels so validating because I've had such similar experiences. And I will say before I launch into my journey, if I had attended something like this when I was an undergrad, which I really wish I had, I feel like the thing that I would have needed to hear was, well, one, start a retirement account right now as soon as possible. I did not do that. And if you just choose to do a PhD, you do not make a lot of money during the PhD. You do not make a lot of money if you choose to do a postdoc or go into academia, which a lot of people do and a lot of people love. You can make good good money in those positions, but it will take some time to get there. And you typically start being able to sort of save the way other people save much later in your life. So I think that's just regardless of which, direction you choose to go. If you do a PhD, I think it's really, really important just to stay that out front and don't be late to the game like I was. But so I had a very, very similar idea. I actually, in reflecting on this, I'm realizing that I think I've generally had a sense of what I wanted to do, but not how I wanted to do it for most of my life. So I also got a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. And I kind of picked that degree and major because it was the only thing I really liked. I did a bunch of other majors and thought, this is great. I knew I wanted to go to grad school. And I didn't really have good reasons for going to grad school other than I didn't really feel like getting a job yet and really joining the real world when I was 22. So I was like, I'm going to keep doing school. I'm good at that. And I went to Michigan in the combined program of education and psychology and did my PhD. Even while I was doing that, I was kind of forging my own path. I was interested in special ed, which that CPEP doesn't really do special ed. I was just kind of making that up as I went and getting, feedback and input from psych and from education and forging my own way. And then after I finished my PhD, it was in 2018. I went to Penn State to do a postdoc, and the postdoc was supposed to be 2 years, which I thought was a good length of time to do a postdoc because typically if you go on the academic job market, it's almost a full year. Like you'll start applying for jobs in the fall, and then you'll go on interviews early the following year, and you'll probably get a job offer by this spring. So it takes a lot of time. It's sort of a lengthy cycle. So if you do a 1-year postdoc, you're pretty much immediately on the job market as soon as you start that postdoc. So a multi-year postdoc is nice. I actually got it extended for a 3rd year, which I thought was going to be a great idea. I did it because I wanted to build up my CV, build up my resume, get more publications so I would be really competitive on the job market. And also because I didn't know whether or not I wanted to be in academia or in industry. I was really undecided. I only really knew Michigan. And so I said, I'm going to go somewhere else and see what it's like in a different department, in a different program. And it was an education policy program, so it was a little bit different. And when I went on the job market, I was still kind of undecided and I was applying to both. I will say that I went on the job market right as the pandemic hit, which was a terrible idea for me. So I was also on the job market for, I think, a full year. And I ended up at my postdoc for 3.5 years. And I had a really similar experience where when I was applying for these academic jobs and I was going on interviews and, I would get pretty far in the process. And I just never felt like in my gut, I was sort of forcing myself to do it because it felt like that was what I should be doing, even though I think that one of the very first slides that Annika displayed was, only a quarter of PhDs do something at a university, and even fewer of those are actual tenure track positions. So I just felt like it was kind of like pulling teeth to write these job applications, but then I would see a position outside of academia for industry and I would get really excited about it. It'd be like a research firm or a nonprofit, and I'd be like, oh, that's really cool. And I started sort of taking stock of my own emotional responses when I was applying for these jobs. And I was like, I do not think that I personally want to be in academia. So I happened to find this job at SRI, and it's kind of a dream job for me because it's a really nice bridge, like I said, between academia and industry. But I have a lot of the benefits of industry that I didn't necessarily have in academia. Benefits for me, I should say, but I think the pay is a little bit better, as we talked about. I have much better work-life balance, and I have a wider variety of things to do. Whereas when I was doing my postdoc, when I was in academia, I mean, you've got a lot of stuff to do, don't get me wrong, but I feel like my projects turn over a lot quicker. Like I could be working on something where I'm working on a paper right now for an academic journal. And I'm also working on a project where we're helping folks who have designed some sort of educational intervention bring that intervention to scale. So try and getting that intervention into more schools, if it's an app, into the hands of teachers or students or families who need the app, and trying to sort of expand the reach of this evidence-based product that they've developed. So I have very, very different experiences on my day-to-day, and it just kind of keeps me interested and engaged. And that's really what I like about it. So.
So my journey, so I completed my bachelor's in psychology, and then I immediately went into a PhD program at the University of Michigan. I completed that in about 5.5 years, which I think is fairly typical for a lot of people. To do a little bit more than 5 years. I realized pretty early on that I did not want to be a professor. I think by my second year, I knew that. And that was for a variety of reasons. I think part of it kind of just comes down to being realistic about what the job prospects were in terms of becoming a professor, while also recognizing my own abilities and desires. And also, stemming back to like kind of the support you get throughout your PhD. I think I definitely like waffled back and forth many times, and that I thought there were times where I became re-energized and thought like, I really could become a professor if I like hunker down and like focus on these things, especially I think by the time like I started working on my dissertation, which was like your final project in a PhD. I was getting really excited about all of that, and I enjoyed the work I was doing. And I thought that like the projects I was doing at that point, like, could make me stand out on the job market. I was focused on like sexuality and relationships, which I think is still stigmatized in terms of like the research you do, but I was like, lots of places like don't have that kind of research, so it would be really great to bring that to more places. And I realized that I didn't want to go into academia, like I said, pretty early on, but I had no clue exactly why or exactly like what I wanted to go into. I think at that time I knew I like wasn't interested in going into tech, which is now ironic because that's where I found myself. So I explored lots of different resources, like the ones that were shared at the beginning. And I knew generally like what my guiding force was is that like I wanted to improve experiences for people, which is like super vague, but like that was kind of the thing. And so I explored academia adjacent roles, things that were still like tied to universities, like working at not necessarily like counseling work, but things that would like, I guess like what Rackham is, which is like our graduate school. Sorry, I'm struggling for the words. At one point, I did want to do like education related research, or things to help improve the way people taught. I think that was a big thing that I realized in grad school is that no one really teaches you how to teach. You get a little bit of that, and like I enjoyed it, but I think yes, higher ed administration, thank you so much. That was like the general guiding force. And so like I started speaking to people doing informational interviews, which is where you interview people in roles that you might be interested in. And so I found those people through various UMich sources, through LinkedIn, if we had some sort of connection, and I would reach out to them. I also did an internship at a place called Ithaca S&R, which if you've heard of JSTOR, they are the research branch of JSTOR, JSTOR being an online publication journal conglomerate. And I really enjoyed my time there in terms of like the research I did. It was great to see that like I had transferable skills that I could use. But that also didn't feel quite right. I don't know why. But it wasn't until like my last semester that I learned about UX research and learned about the different types of roles in tech. I think prior to that, I thought that like to work in tech, you needed to do something related to like data science. And my quant skills, while strong, were not quite at the level that you need to like get hired. Like you need to know like R, which is a statistical program. And I was not so good at that stuff and didn't want to be working with like very large data sets. But then I learned about UX research somehow, I don't remember, probably through a panel similar to this. And yeah, the idea of like helping build better experiences for people was really resonated. And kind of the thing that solidified that career path for me was actually just like moving and the area that I would end up in. So I moved from, at the end of my PhD, I moved from Michigan to California because my partner, who was doing a postdoc in chemistry, got a job in biotech, and the Bay Area is really big for biotech. For anyone who has friends that want a biotech career, come here. And you know, there's a ton of tech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. Like Meta, Google, Amazon, like all of them are here in Silicon Valley. And I did the move. I didn't have a job. I was done with the PhD. I took a little bit of time off to kind of settle in, and then I went on the job search. I applied to both full-time positions, like at a company, so like being a direct employer of, say, Google or Amazon. But then I also kind of expanded my search to look for temporary positions, which is essentially what I'm doing now, where a company, tech companies frequently have needs for someone to come in for a short amount of time to like backfill for a worker who might be out on leave or something. Or they just have like a temporary need for additional support. And that's kind of how I moseyed my way in into my former role. And my current role was essentially just a referral from my previous manager. So that's kind of how I've found myself in the space.
Real quick, I don't know if it's a good time. We had a question in the chat that it looks like Adrian already answered, but if you could redo your post-undergrad education, do you think there is a non-PhD degree that would allow you to get a similar job to what you have now? And Adrian answered yes. You're welcome to expand on that, or if anyone else wants to jump in.
I would say yes. Like, you absolutely don't even need a post-bachelor's degree to do what I'm doing now, really. Like, I obviously got some skills from my PhD, being able to do research and statistical analysis, and that's helped a lot. But I'm very much in like the DEI consulting space, and I see a lot of DEI consultants who don't have master's degrees or PhDs. Some of them do have master's degrees, but it's, you know, some people come straight out of undergrad and start at the bottom and work their way up. And so I think that, considering it took me like 12 years post undergrad to get to my job with all my different experiences, I think I absolutely could have gotten here with alternative paths as well.
I would say it's similar for me. I think most of the people that I see in UX research roles in tech do have PhDs, but certainly not all. There's a decent chunk of people on my current team who do not have PhDs and have made their way into UX research through various different ways. The key thing, I think, like Abby said, is getting those research skills. For UX research, there are degrees you could do in human-computer interaction. So like you could do a master's degree in that. I think that would be offered through something like the School of Information. I don't know if there's probably like UX degrees. Some of those degrees typically tend to focus on like becoming a UX designer, which is not what I do. You're the person who's like creating like the physical thing that people, or the computer thing that people will be interacting with. But there's certainly some research skills that you can gain along the way. And that, you know, that's a much shorter degree. I think for me, the PhD was certainly worth it in terms of like, you know, the critical thinking skills and the various research skills that you get, and just like exposure to so many different topics. So, I mean, if I were to redo it, I'm sure I could choose a similar path, but there are also other ways to get into UX research.
I'll just add too. Sorry, Chrissy, I don't know if you
No,
were
no,
to
I
jump
don't have
in.
anything to add. Everyone said.
I was just gonna say, I know, you know, there, like, at least in my position, there are folks who have master's degrees in psychology or in education who started at this company and worked their way into a promotion. So they have the same job title as I do. And we do have similar skills, but I think having a PhD, I think Abby put this in the chat, it does carry a little bit more weight. And I was able to negotiate my way into that role rather than working in a sort of lower role for a while. I just entered right in at the higher role at the higher salary, and I have a little bit more responsibility than I would otherwise. I will also say that my fiance just got his PhD in kinesiology, and he's starting work at a healthcare consulting company that was specifically hiring out PhDs because you gain these skills and this expertise and this training that you don't get elsewhere. So there is a merit to getting a PhD. It's not like you can just bypass the PhD entirely. There's pros and cons to it. So yeah.
I also wanted to add to that because, yeah, in thinking about the value of having a PhD, yes, without one, you can work your way up. But I think that the PhD also, even people who are doing what I'm doing don't think about things the same way that I think about things, because I've had that experience of sort of the academic philosophizing around why are we making the decisions that we're making. So, you can learn certain skills on the job, but I think that there's something unique about the PhD program that teaches you how to think and how to question the assumptions that go into the actions that you're taking. And I think that's unique to a PhD program.
Yeah. A related question is, during your PhD experience, did you, and this might depend on when you kind of decided that maybe academia wasn't for you, or maybe started percolating that idea. During your PhD, did you seek to gain skills that you knew would be good for a career in non-academic jobs, in addition to those that are commonly valued in academia? And if so, how did you identify those skills?
I'm happy to let someone else go first if someone else wants to start.
I can be kind of quick. I really didn't think about industry until like in my postdoc. So I would say like I did not like do things like internships or workshops that would have helped maybe get like certain jobs. So, but that is to say, I just mean like it's not too late. Like I think you just have to be able to talk about the skills that you have during the PhD, and like in the industry way. So like I think sometimes when I read industry jobs, I was like, oh, I'm not credited, like I can't do this. But no, we are. We have meetings with our advisors. We like, you're trying to do these things for stakeholders that is like either the grant or your advisor. So I think it's really just like a communication, like translating your skills and being able to also like hone it. Because the biggest irritant was that in interviews, a lot of them were like, so you're really educated, but you have no experience. And I had to fight back and be like, well, no, like the whole PhD is actually experience / it is a job. Like we are researchers for the university, we are teachers, all that kind of stuff. So that's just what my little 2 cents there.
I agree with Christy. I don't think I thought about it as much as I should have during the PhD. When I was a postdoc, I went to a bunch of workshops very similar to this actually, but sought out specific resources that are targeted towards people with PhDs who are considering transitioning to industry. And a lot of that is just, you already have the skills, but they kind of teach you the language to go along with it, because the language of academia can be very different at times from the language of industry. So being able to talk about your skills in a way that is, you have earned these things, you have this training, but here's how you talk about it to someone who is in business rather than in a university setting. I think that is one skill that I still feel I'm learning even 2 years into my current job. So I mean, even just taking a business class, I feel like, and really paying attention to the way they talk about things, sales, marketing, clients, relations, things like that. Like that was just helpful. I will also say that I am someone who, like I said, I think I've just done things that make sense. They're fun to me. And I I had all these really important questions about special education that I was realizing I didn't have the tools to answer. And so I ended up seeking out a lot of methods expertise during my PhD. I took a lot of classes. I would never have considered myself a methods person. I felt like I had a very tenuous grasp on statistics at best, but I couldn't answer the questions that I wanted to answer without sort of diving into the methods. And I think for me, that's been the biggest benefit and the biggest thing that prepared me for an industry, or I guess a non-academic career, because I think those skills were what my organization was really seeking when they put this job call out. And that means that I can work on projects that are not just special ed. And I do work on projects that are sort of outside what I would consider the realm of my I guess knowledge expertise, but I can consult on projects that are designing a study and working with missing data, or if they have a large data set and they want to analyze it, they can reach out to me and ask how they might do that. And I get paid for my time responding to those questions and kind of thinking through brainstorming with them. So that was really helpful. And that could be true for quantitative methods, qualitative methods, just making sure that you have a really rich toolbox of methods, I think, at least in my role, was really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'll echo, both what Christy and Adrian said. I did mention that I sought out an internship. Part of that was just, to gain more exposure to what potential roles would be like outside of academia. A large part of it was also just learning to see like, how do they communicate about research differently, especially how does research relate to a business's goals? So I really like, Adrian, you mentioned that like you took a business class. Like I think that would probably be really valuable. I mean, even not necessarily going out for a class, but like trying to understand like what is important to how a business operates, and how to help a company achieve the business goals, would probably be really useful. Like what is part of like the product life cycle. I think another thing that became really important for me in my role is learning more about qualitative methods. That is something I was able to do more so through my internship, and various courses I took during the PhD. So that was like an additional skill set that most PhDs like don't typically focus on, but I think Michigan is very unique in offering that. And I also did seek out lots of training from like Rackham, our graduate center that has lots of workshops on transferable skills. I feel like a lot of that is really just about like communicating how what you have done translates over to what your current role is. So yeah, definitely communication is very important in that. Trying to like convince people that like what you have done like does count as experience, as like Christy and Adrian were saying.
I definitely agree with everything everyone else has said. And I would just add that I also wasn't thinking about industry jobs during my PhD. So I wasn't thinking about transferring skills until I got to my second postdoc. And that was at the University of Virginia. And they were offering a free R workshop. And I did go to a few R workshops that were offered at the University of Michigan as well. And so because I knew I thought at the time that I wanted to go into tech and, do data science. I knew that R was something that was really sought after. And so I really wanted to brush up on R skills. And one thing I would say is start looking at jobs that you're interested in, like searching for jobs on LinkedIn or looking at job descriptions. And that will tell you what kinds of skills they're looking for. And oftentimes like they said, you already do have those skills. So for example, some jobs will say that they want someone to do A/B testing. Well, what's A/B testing? It's just looking at this or that, which is like experimental design. Like I know how to do that. Like, so, it's really learning how to use the language that they're using in the job description. Yeah.
I know that Christy has to head out, though she's generously offered us to share her email if people have additional questions for this, for her after this. But thank you, Christy, for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to answer like one more question if anyone has something specific for me, or just like the general questions too.
I'll say it was good to see you.
It's good to see everyone.
Go
Okay, yeah. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to set up a one-on-one meeting chat. I'm still in Ann Arbor, so if you want, I can even just like swing by and grab coffee with anyone and or meet on Zoom or call again. It was so good to see you all. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Stay.
Okay. There was a question in the chat about work-life balance. I know a few of, I just wanted to highlight that because it is a really important question. And there were a few answers, but wondering if anyone wanted to speak to anything else about work-life balance during your PhD versus at your current position, and the different, like maybe some pros and cons of that work-life balance. And then also I know related to this is pay. If there are any differences there and if that was a factor for you at all.
Yeah, I can jump in. I can't like type while listening to everyone else. But so for me, it hasn't really been necessarily about the number of hours that I'm working, but just like how I feel about the work that I'm doing. During my PhD, I really struggled to like make myself work. Like I know a lot of PhDs will work way more than 40 hours a week. They have quite a lot that they need to be doing. There's always something ongoing. But I really struggled with disciplining myself or finding motivation. So I would frequently not work the 40 hours. And that definitely impacted the quality of my work and just generally my mental health during the process because I didn't want to be doing what I was doing. Now I am in essentially a contracted position where I think it was similar to Adrienne, where I'm like I work my 40 hours a week. I don't get overtime unless like I have it pre-approved by my manager. So my time is protected. That said, people who are in full-time roles at the company that is my client for Accenture, like they do not necessarily have those same protections. So if they need to finish a project by a certain deadline, that may require them to work more than 40 hours a week. So if you go into a full-time role, and I think it depends a lot on company culture, like I've heard really brutal things about working at Apple, and that like they are very much like grind culture. You are there. And a lot of these tech companies, at least previously, have designed it so that you don't leave by catering to all of your needs. So I think that is a thing to consider. I contract, I get paid on an hourly basis. I do not get to do like this. I don't get the same level of insight into projects because I'm not necessarily communicating with all of the different team members. There's things that I am excluded from, which I think can, for a lot of people, impact your sense of belonging at a company. Because you're not able to access various resources, including resources that you need to do your job. And if that's something people are interested in, I'm happy to like talk about that more later. I won't go into it now. But like I said, that kind of offers me that protection. And in terms of like the question about like compensation for like contract work at these tech companies, there's still like basics that they are required to give you. So like, my healthcare is covered. Other benefits, like I don't have retirement contributions that like my company, there's no company match for me for that. So that's like all things that I'm funding. but the pay for UX research in the Bay Area is very good. It's hard for me to give you like an exact estimate, but my current compensation is around $150,000 a year right now, which is, I think, on par for people who are full-time employees of these various tech companies in the Bay Area. That will, of course, vary depending on where you are. But with a lot of these tech companies, there's also freedom to move around. More companies nowadays are requiring you to work in person. I have stayed fully remote, and I know coworkers who are fully remote. With these sorts of like consulting agencies, you may also be more like Accenture, you may be more likely to work remotely. That was an important consideration for me in moving from academia to industry, and that I knew I wanted to be in a large city. I did not want to like end up in a place like I did for my undergrad, which was like a very small city of like 10,000, 30,000 people. So yeah, have that flexibility. Yeah, I think those are like the major points for that.
I responded in the chat, so I don't have much to add beyond that. Although I will say, I appreciate the salary transparency, and I'm going to do the same thing. That when I was looking at academic positions for my skill set, for my expertise, they were paying probably around $70,000 to $80,000. And when I started at SRI, I started above six figures. So I think this year I will probably be making 110, and I'm in my second year. And we get raises every year. We work with a company. It's like a couple $1,000s every year, but it is increasing yearly, which is really nice. And I will also say that, Stacy, I appreciate the honesty about not working 40 hours. I don't think I'd ever worked 40 hours before I started this job. And I always felt guilty about it, because I feel like there is a little bit of a culture in academia where you should be working all the time. And if you're not going to get ahead. When I started grad school, I went to a talk at Rackham, which is the overarching graduate institution at Michigan. And I don't remember who she was, but a speaker got up and told all of us incoming PhDs, all doctoral candidates, people in PhD programs across the whole university, that in order to be successful, we needed to work at least 100,000 hours a week, 100 hours a week. And no, I mean, I'm sure people do that, but you can be successful without working that much. And in fact, even during my postdoc, I had people telling me if I wanted to be successful in academia, I should be working on the weekends. And like, no questions about that. Like, you need to be doing this if you want to be successful. And that was just not something I was willing to do. For my own mental health, I need to take breaks and I need to have weekends off. And sometimes I work on the weekends to sort of accommodate other things that are happening in my life. But yeah, it was not a hard and fast rule like people kind of made it out to be. In fact, when I was in my postdoc right around COVID, I got so burned out, partly because of the pandemic, but partly because I was just burned out with this like academic culture, that I think I maybe was working maybe 20 hours a week. I mean, maybe not even. And I agree that the quality of my work was not great. I was not being productive. I was not getting things done. And I feel like I'm much more like I'm contributing to the world and to my job and to my position. And I'm happier doing it. Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate that.
I will say that I did not have good work-life balance at the beginning of my graduate like education. I was one of those people who was like either working or thinking about work all the time. I worked on weekends. I would go to Weiser, is that what the call? Whatever is next to East Hall. I forget what it's called, but there's a building next to East Hall. I would work there on the weekends. It didn't help that my husband at the time was also in my program. We had the same advisors. We were on the same papers. So I had no escape from work. We were always talking about work, thinking about work. It was too much. And had a negative effect on my well-being, negative effect on my marriage, got divorced. And I had a puppy and she died. Like everything was just going wrong in my life. And it was August 2019 when she died. And I realized, well, like the last day she was alive, I was at work on campus, just working on my education for no reason. I was ahead. Like I was literally ahead in my program. I graduated a semester early. no reason for me to be working that much. I just did it because it's what I did. And it really reframed how I thought about work and family. And then several months later, COVID happened. And of course, again, reframed how I thought. And so I did not have very good work-life balance my first like 3 years at the University of Michigan. And after my puppy died, I just sort of stopped working. And like for months, I probably didn't even open my dissertation. Like I just stopped, stopped applying for jobs, stopped doing everything. When I did get my postdoc, that's when I realized I was not going to be able to have work-life balance in academia because there was a lot that was expected of me. And I'll never forget when I was told that if I wanted to succeed at an R1, which is a research intensive university, like University of Michigan, I was going to have to work like a CEO. And I was like, CEOs get paid millions of dollars a year and I'm getting paid $50K. Like, I'm not going to do that. And so that was part of what made me realize like this wasn't for me. Just the level of work and the amount of compensation just did not align. And so now in terms of work-life balance, like I said, if I don't have a client project, I don't have work to do. I seek out work and they're like, nothing for you. So it's like, it's not like I'm being lazy and just like, you know, whatever with my job. It's just, it is what it is. And so there are times when I don't think I've ever, like Adrian, I track my hours. I have to track billable hours versus non-billable hours. And if I'm completely honest, I don't think I've worked a 40-hour week since I started 2 years ago. And some weeks I've worked like 2 hours. Like it really, like it just really depends on what's going on with the client. And I have such great work-life balance that like I have a 10-month-old baby at home. I went back to work after 8 weeks and we've been looking for a nanny and daycare. Well, we don't want daycare, but a nanny or a babysitter. And we haven't been successful in finding one yet, but we've been able to manage with my husband also working from home partially. He sometimes goes into the office. But for the most part, I'm with my baby all day. I started a coaching business where I do relationship and dating coaching. And I'm able to do that because I have so much free time. And and in terms of compensation, they're paying me, what are they paying me? When I started, it was $120,000 plus a 20% bonus, which works out to about $144, I believe. And I get paid a little bit more. I think my total compensation now is closer to $154 or something like that. I can't remember the exact number, but yeah, getting paid 3 times as much as my postdoc to do a lot less. So.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that thank you all for your transparency and that this has been so helpful and affirming. I'll speak for myself as a 5th-year PhD student, that this has been really, really helpful. Kathy asked in the chat, do any of you have any tips for people looking for UXR or research jobs in tech or tech adjacent companies, given the current state of the market? Yeah, Stacy, would you like to elaborate, or does anyone else have anything to add or chime in about that?
Yeah, so as I wrote in the chat, tech generally has gone through a pretty big hiring freeze over the past year, which affected the first role that I had out of grad school. But all these different tech companies will frequently hire temporary workers, which I personally think I may do for the rest of my life. Like I may never want to like go through like the elaborate process to like get hired at a place like Google and have all the additional responsibilities. Of course, that is something that I think would be good to talk to other people about, but trying to seek out these temp roles, which typically will go from anywhere from like 3 months up to 2 years, but could also be indefinite as long as the client continues to renew a contract with your agency. So I currently work at Accenture, but I work through Accenture Flex, which is like their contracting part. So I'm not even a full Accenture employee, which is why I don't get full PTO and company match for retirement, that kind of stuff, which, you know, I feel comfortable given my compensation and other things generally. But the barrier to entry is lower for these temporals. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm explaining them well enough, but or like how to find them. I have a LinkedIn post that I can share of like what these different companies are. And the way that I even found out about this was, being active on LinkedIn and like applying through jobs. Once you start applying for jobs, recruiters at different staffing agencies will kind of get your name and they may call you about these temporary roles. And in these temporary roles, you get placed on a team and you typically get to interact directly with people at whatever company that is. There's different types of roles that I don't think is important to get into, but for me, for my first role, I had one interview. I was supposed to have a second interview for the role. They ended up canceling it and just hired me, which was really great. But like compared to the like full process to get hired at Google, which is where like I had my first placement, like you go through at least 4 or 5 rounds of interviews, and that lasts like I think at least 3 months and is pretty difficult even if you have a referral. So if you feel comfortable, and of course this also depends on like whether or not you're like a US citizen or if you need a visa sponsorship, like that becomes really difficult. But like trying to look for these temporary roles on LinkedIn, you will see roles for these positions. And it's been a while since I've been on the job market. So like I'll need to take a look to see exactly what it looks like. But like you will see positions listed for like 6-month contract at a large social media company, which you'll be working at like Meta or Facebook. Same thing. And like you can apply through those. I also mentioned that during a PhD and potentially during undergrad, there are internships you can do at these tech companies for UX and for other things as well. Those are paid. I think someone told me that you get paid, like I think it was for a Facebook or Google internship, it was like $9,000 a month, and they cover your living expenses, which is wild. And if you can convince your PhD supervisor to like let you go away to the Bay Area or wherever for 2 months, like that's a great way to get into it. Networking and just like looking for jobs on LinkedIn is good. I did find a potential position that I interviewed for from somebody who had just like posted that they had an opening. So I interviewed at Pepsi because I just saw a LinkedIn post from somebody that was hiring, and I was like, I'm interested. I'm on the job market. And so I feel like there's like hashtags you can look up on LinkedIn for something like hashtag I'm hiring or something like that. That could be a way to see like those more informal positions. But yeah, those are some of the options that I've seen out there, and I will dig up those LinkedIn posts that I've saved and drop them in the chat and also send them to the organizers.
I just dropped in the chat that the University of Michigan provides LinkedIn Learning for free for students. And so you definitely want to take advantage of LinkedIn Learning because it gives you have access to a library of courses. I've learned how to be better at data visualization. I've learned how to be better at Excel, better at R, SPSS, lots of different courses that you can take through LinkedIn Learning.
For UX, sorry.
Go ahead.
Google has a UX design course on Coursera, which you can audit for free. It's mostly focused on design, but they also do have like a research overview. So that is also really helpful. But yeah, +1 to LinkedIn Learning.
I don't have anything to add about user experience internships specifically, but I will say one more general piece of advice that occurred to me is, some of these companies like SRI and very similar type nonprofits offer entry-level positions for people right out of undergrad. So if you don't know whether you want to go get a PhD or a master's, you could just apply to one of these companies and work there for a year or two and then go do your master's or PhD. A lot of people do that. We oftentimes are specifically looking for undergrads coming out of like a psych major, because we need data collectors or we need people to go into schools, and it's the exact same type of work that you would do in a PhD program, so that when you apply for a PhD program, if you've already done that work, maybe even as an undergrad in a lab, but also kind of working for a research-based company, like it'll give you a leg up. So, and that'll also allow you to see, do you like the kind of work? Do you see, do you like what the people at the higher up positions are doing? Would you like to aspire to that? Could you use a PhD to sort of get yourself into those positions? That kind of thing. So it's kind of on the same vein as an internship, but just more general advice there.
Thank you. In the chat, there's a question. Do you have any tips for maintaining work-life balance while in your PhD program?
Honestly, I'm not the best person to give advice here since I didn't have it. I just had to choose one day to stop working so much. And like, I mean, I was reading about my dissertation. Like, I would wake up with like thoughts about like, oh, I'm gonna write this sentence in this paper, and so I'd like write that down like at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, I had no work-life balance. So I'm not the best person to ask that question to. I'm sorry.
I've heard
I
that.
feel like, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Abby, you're not alone there. I've definitely heard that from other folks too, that they dream in their dissertation.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Like, I don't think that, indicates that you don't have good work-life balance. I have a lot of friends, including from CPEP, who went on to be professors, and they do that. They're like, they just love their research so much that they dream about it and they're so excited about it, and they can't wake up and they can't wait to wake up and work on it. And so they work all the time because they genuinely love to do that. And so I don't want to, when I do these sort of panels, I never want to like take away from people's joy. If that's really what motivates you and you're really happy doing that, like that's your work-life balance, that it refreshes you, it rejuvenates you. That's awesome. I personally, I've gone through those phases, but I'm overall not that person. And so I needed to find something that worked for my life. And I put in the chat that I did a couple of different things. I religiously went to the yoga classes, Brianna. So I was like, that was so helpful for me during grad school to just have some sort of like exercise routine. I coached high school swimming, which was mostly just during the fall, but it was 3 hours out of every day that I was on a pool deck and I couldn't work, but I was able to be sort of an expert in something else and to interact with my community, and like just having the ability to sort of shift out of my academic mindset to something else for a limited amount of time was so helpful for me. So
Yeah, I don't know exactly what to add. I mean, I already revealed to you all that I didn't work my 40 hours a week as I should, but because the anxiety is always there, it's like it feels like you're working a lot. And I mean, I didn't really have any hobbies necessarily back during grad school or even during college. Like that was one of the things that just like has happened to me over time, and that like I've been able to invest more and more into that. But like, I don't know, trying to think through like what are the things that bring you joy, like in terms of exploring or developing new hobbies. Like I think that's important. Like, and I think there are a lot of communities that like you can go to. Also, everyone meet Demaya. This is one of my cats. I think also trying to like making sure you're putting time and effort into developing friendships, like that was really key for me. I think especially during the pandemic when we were all isolated, like I think having a group of people that like I was isolated with was really important, and also helped me like find my like balance and develop like interests beyond school. And I think that's also just something that takes time for people sometimes. Like, I was never a person who like knew what they wanted to do or knew what things brought me joy, and that has just like come with time. So yeah, I don't necessarily have anything like grad school specific for that, but that's what my experience has been. And or you can also get a cat, or a dog or whatever fluffy animal.
Getting a dog helped. I will second that.
I will third that.
Thank you all. To wrap up, a final question from me is, what is the most challenging aspect of your job, and what do you enjoy the most about your job? And then if you have any additional, like one last piece of advice or closing thought for the group.
I have to think about the last piece of advice, but I think I've said everything, so I'm just going to go first and shut up. But I think the most challenging aspect for me is probably the fact that we have to track our hours so closely. That's annoying. I mean, I have to plan out, I have a lot of flexibility when I work, but I do have to work 40 hours a week unless I take PTO. And we do get good PTO, which is nice, but that for me is definitely the most challenging, because one thing that was nice, at least during the PhD or the postdoc or an academic job, other jobs might be that if I was just having a rough day and work wasn't coming, I wasn't feeling it, I could walk away for a while and come back to it. And I can't really do that to the same extent now. I really do have to be working on things. So, everybody has good days and bad days. But the thing that I really like most about my job is that I get to switch it up. I'm not just working on papers. I'm not working on one thing. It's not like I'm teaching the same class repeatedly. Or working on the same research project for years and years and years and years. Some of them will be multi-year projects, but some of them are like 4 months and I'm done. And so I'm getting a lot of experience and I get to try new things. And I think just the way my brain works, that makes me happy, just being able to sort of transition to new things. So yeah.
I would say that the most challenging part about my job specifically is just finding a different way of working. I'm used to the academic model of like a lot of collaboration, a lot of iteration. Like you present your first and your second and your third and your fourth draft, and they're all ugly before you get to the sort of final model. Versus, at least in my current position, things sort of have to be done from beginning to end by myself before, and then they just go out to the client. So it's got to be perfect and error free. Versus I'm used to like going back and forth checking with somebody like with my code. I don't really have that, and maybe other industry jobs do. But just the nature of my job and where I'm placed, there's nobody else at my job that I can talk to that does what I do. So it can get pretty lonely that way. And like Adrian, I have to also track my hours, not to like the same level of detail. Like I've got to track I can go granular as 15 minutes, but it's basically like what matters is the billable hours. Everything else is sort of just like general research or whatever. And so I don't find the tracking like that cumbersome because I only have to really track the billable hours like very closely. Then when it comes to what I love about my job, there's just like, it's just really cool to be able to do the work that I do and learn about compensation. I've learned so much about the pay gap globally and in the US in particular. I've learned a lot about just different gender dynamics, especially for women who are working mothers, who are in relationships with men, and just the different expectations in the home that women have to deal with and how that impacts pay. And just being able to translate the work that I've done around DEI and equity and like bias and discrimination into a way that has a tangible effect on people's livelihoods. That's really awesome. And it helps that I get paid what I get paid and I get lots of benefits. Like we're closed the week between Christmas and New Year's, so I get paid for that week in addition to my PTO for the year. From all summer. So from Memorial Day to Labor Day, I get Friday afternoons off paid. Just so many other things. We pay for my phone bill. I get legal representation for really cheap, 401k match. What else? There's just a lot. Every once in a while, we'll get a deposit for work from home, like deposit. I don't even know what it's called, but I'll get an extra few $100s on my paycheck for working from home. If I worked in the office, my office is based out of Boston and I live in Maryland. I get to work remotely, and that's not ever going to change. But if I were to live in the Boston area or near one of their other offices, I could I could receive like reimbursement for travel. And like, I know professor friends who pay for their parking on campus, and I'm like, you're like, it's just a different level of benefits that I really appreciate and enjoy. So yeah, lots to love about my job. And when I think about advice that I would leave to you all on this call, it would be just to be open to other experiences and know that, like, at least for me, like when I removed my identity from my job, it allowed me to expand more, because when I got my identity from my job, I had to be a professor. I had to have that title of Dr. Abby or whatever it was. And when I allowed myself to think about what it was that I really wanted out of life, I could see that there were other paths to get to what I wanted that would be easier for me, more enjoyable. And, I don't have to be in academia to do research that I love. And I don't have to be in academia to teach. I get to teach all the time. So like, it's just being able to reframe how you think about what you want and being open to other experiences might help you to end up where you would never have expected. Because until 2 years ago, I had no idea what compensation consulting was. So yeah, thank you for having me.
It's so lovely to like
And
hear
I
you.
I want to add one more thing. Sorry. Like Christy said, you can feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat if you want to set up a meeting or anything. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I was just saying it's like really lovely to hear from you all, and just, to hear like the happiness that comes from you, and like in the jobs you're doing. I hear you that there's really challenging parts, but overall it sounds like you guys are happy in your roles, and that makes me really happy too. I think for me, what I like and dislike most about my jobs are probably pretty similar, in that it's like the collaboration with other people that I love and hate most. And so for me, I work with a lot of people that have different like functions than I do. So like I mentioned, designers, engineers, project managers, and I really enjoy that somebody else kind of tells me what the focus is. I have creative control over like how I execute the research, and I'm able to influence the direction of a project, while also being able to like figure out, like have a problem that someone else has identified that I need to solve. So I really like that. But at the same time, having to work with other people, like there's a lot of tension in terms of like what someone else thinks the research should be is not necessarily what you would agree with. And then there might be something that pulls the project in one direction in a way that like you don't agree with. So I guess like what I mean by that is sometimes a team will decide that something is an issue, but they actually haven't done any research to like show like that is the thing that we should be going after. Like they have the hypothesis and they're like, yeah, do some research, validate these designs. But you're like, well, we actually don't know that that is the thing that we need to be improving on. Like I have a project right now where the design team and the project managers have come up with like these 3 different solutions for how we can simplify a process. But I'm like, I don't know that simplifying that process is actually what we need to be doing in order to get you the metrics that you want to be seeing. So that can be hard, especially at my level where I don't necessarily have that influence and don't have that communication with like people who are in different positions. And when someone comes to you and they say, like, we want you to do this research and like essentially tell us what we want to hear, like that is pretty challenging. And you have to learn how to navigate those situations and figure out when to shut up versus when to like actually like speak up. I think so, yeah, I think that's like working with other people is it's very different than what I encountered in my PhD. And I really like that. And then I guess in terms of advice, I don't know, I really struggle with this, but I think just like exploring different possibilities and like leaving the future open, like I would, to the best of your ability to like tolerate that uncertainty, like that is what I would encourage people to like lean into, because life circumstances will change. I would not have the job I have now if it wasn't because my partner needed to move to the Bay Area, and that like limited / opened up what types of jobs I could have. But exploring things, talking to people as much as you can, and I know that's difficult and may or may not provide the clarity you're seeking in the moment, but overall is a helpful part of that journey, especially for folks who are here who are like still in undergrad. You know, there's like so many different paths forward. I think a PhD is great, but there's also other ways to like end up where you want to end up. So yeah, embrace uncertainty, I guess, is my tip. And maybe get a therapist along the way.
We should have said that. How did you get through your PhD? Therapy. Therapy was crucial.
I think that's like a big thing when like there's incoming students into the program, where like get on a therapy wait list now. And I think that can be scary to like tell an incoming student, but like hopefully also normalizes that like you could go to therapy for any number of reasons, and it can be helpful.
Such great advice, comments, remarks. Thank you all so much, our panelists, for being here. This has been really fantastic. And we will share the resources that were shared in the chat with the attendees here. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. And I think I'll let everyone go on with their evening or morning or afternoon or wherever you're at. But thank you.
Thanks for
so
having
much
us.
for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.